Hello and welcome to Heroes and Humans of Football. My name is Mehreen Khan.
And I'm Simon Cooper. This is the football show where we take the hero and we show you the human.
From Johan Cruyff to Megan Rapinoe.
And from George Best to Kylian Mbappe.
This is the Human Football Podcast.
Last week's episode was on Carlo Ancelotti, the pig farmer's son who became every player's favourite manager. If you haven't already, please go back and check it out.
Welcome to Heroes and Humans, where today's episode is on star boy England and Real Madrid's Jude Bellingham. So we spoke about Bellingham a little bit in last week's episode where we discussed Carlo Ancelotti. And Simon, I guess he's the man of the moment, as it were.
Yeah, that's also why we're doing this in a hurry, long distance, so my voice does not sound as dulcet as usual because my microphone does not yet work. So here I am from my home in Paris discussing Jude Bellingham, who is that very rare phenomenon, an absolutely world-class England footballer. We don't really historically have that many great English footballers. I mean, when I was trying to think of parallels and precedents, in my memory, well, they say Bobby Charlton, Gary Lineker, Wayne Rooney. Lineker and Rooney don't quite stack up to Bellingham. So I thought actually the strongest parallel for an English footballer of the Bellingham standard is Roy of the Rovers. He's most like Roy of the Rovers.
I'm going to have to stop you because I always thought Roy of the Rovers was a myth, because this is the kind of stuff that English commentators always wheel out when there's an FA Cup giant killing and they say, oh, it's Roy of the Rovers stuff. And I assumed that, is it a guy who played for Blackburn Rovers? No?
I'm amazed at the limits of your education. So Roy of the Rovers is a comic book hero. He started in the 1950s. He does not really exist.
He's not real.
He's not real. He's this handsome, blonde hero who scores amazing goals for Melchester Rovers. He becomes their manager as well. And Roy can do everything. He's a kind of fantasy figure. There's still a version of Roy of the Rovers going on, apparently, 70 years later in some graphic novel.
So it wasn't Roy Hodgson playing for Blackburn Rovers?
I don't think Roy Hodgson played professional football. No, so Roy of the Rovers is the closest parallel English football has produced, I think, to Jude Bellingham. Because Roy also, he wins everything, he can do everything, the man has no limits. He's sort of one step above.
But he's not blonde-haired and blue-eyed. He's a mixed-race kid from Birmingham.
Yeah, so Roy was an English hero of the 50s. And I think one of the interesting things about Jude Bellingham that we'll come to is that as a mixed-race guy, he exemplifies the fastest growing ethnic group in modern Britain.
Got it. Okay. So I think that was very helpful, because myself and I imagine a lot of the even younger listeners are not going to really understand the Roy of the Rovers parallel. So I'm glad that as Dinosaur Dad, you did clear that up. That's good. So you think he's Roy of the Rovers, but for a 21st century modern Britain?
Yes. Yeah. And also real, because Jude Bellingham does actually exist. Now, this is also why we're doing him, because he exists and he is great. But he's surprisingly little known as a quantity in England, certainly, or people who follow English football, because he played here very briefly only for Birmingham, just 44 games. And then he went to Dortmund, which is not watched by everyone all the time. And it's only really this year at Madrid that he's playing for a world-leading club, and everybody has him forced on their consciousness. But I felt we just know way too little about this guy, given his outsized importance to sort of English football and global football.
As you said, there's a lot to unpack about Bellingham. And I think beyond his character, his personality, his upbringing, I think we can also argue that there is something special about Jude Bellingham, because he's probably one of the first major figures or young players to emerge in an era of peak footballing globalization. So we already mentioned he's born and raised in the West Midlands. He's developed in Germany with Dortmund, and he's been perfected in Madrid, all before his 21st birthday. There's an argument, potentially, if we do this in 10 years' time or 15 years' time, that Jude Bellingham might be the greatest English footballer to have never played in the Premier League. I think it's perfectly conceivable, as he's already said, that he would spend the rest of his career in Madrid. And that makes him a huge anomaly in English football, and talking about English footballers generally.
Yeah, I mean, the choice to leave the country is a very interesting one, which we'll come to. But yeah, it was essential to go deep on Bellingham, especially since he might be about to win his first Champions League. I use the word first advisedly because I don't think it will stop there, when Real Madrid play his old mates at Dortmund at Wembley on June 1st.
So let's do some stats. And even though he's 20 years old, we had far too many to choose from, and this is just a couple of them. If Jude Bellingham starts in the Champions League final against Dortmund, he will make a record number of appearances in the Champions League before the age of 21 and beating the record of Real Madrid's former goalkeeper Iker Casillas.
And he has all these youngest ever records. So he was the youngest ever Birmingham debutant, beating his hero Trevor Francis. The second youngest ever Birmingham debutant is Jude's brother, Jude Bellingham, who we'll also come to.
And if we're going to add to all of the youngest stuff, he was the youngest player to captain a Bundesliga side when he was at Dortmund. He became the youngest player to score at a World Cup when he scored in the opening game in Qatar, England versus Iran. That record has now been usurped. So he's racking up all of the records. And I think most remarkably about this season at Real Madrid, he's racking up goal records. Bellingham scored an astonishing 14 goals in his first 15 games at Real Madrid. And that was a record that was previously set by Cristiano Ronaldo. And even before that was set by absolute legend of Real Madrid, Alfredo Di Stefano. And this is a guy who was supposed to be a number 6 or a number 8 or a number 4 when he arrived at Real Madrid. We can go on and on and on. But this is just a sort of sense of how I think totemic Bellingham has become as a figure already at Real Madrid.
Yeah, and a very surprising figure playing in a position he wasn't supposed to play. Now, none of this is an accident. We are going to talk you through his life and show that, much like Kylian Mbappe, go back to a Kylian Mbappe episode ever, he was kind of prepared for stardom in a very efficient way by a very high achieving family. He couldn't really have been born into a better football family. So let's go back to the West Midlands, to the origins. Maureen has decided not to do this in a Birmingham accent.
I may slip in and out of a slight Brummie accent now and then. I just would like the listeners to be patient with me.
Out of respect for local sensitivities, she is not going to do it at all. And if anyone is offended, please write to me and I will take care of it.
Yeah, we've already pissed off all of the Scousers with our Klopp episode, so I don't want a whole other region of non-London England being upset at me.
Yeah. So tell us where he's from.
Jude is born in Stourbridge in the West Midlands in 2003. He's brought up in what he describes as a working class and a mixed race family, and he's the eldest of 2 boys. We've already mentioned his younger brother, Job. And in a sense, he's a very modern Briton. Somebody else that we've spoken about with a unique upbringing is Kylian Mbappe. Kylian is also mixed race. Jude's father is English and Irish. His mum is black. And he grows up in a pretty urban environment in the West Midlands where, as far as I can also see, being a mixed-race kid doesn't make you stand out as much as it would have done, say, if he was born in the 90s or even the 80s. So in some senses, he is very much a product of a Britain that has changed radically in the last 20 or 30 years.
And his father is a hugely significant figure in this story because Mark is the kind of non-league Alan Shearer. He scores, I think, 700 goals.
Thierry Henry, let's give him some props.
Yeah, you think you're going to upgrade him to Thierry Henry?
I've seen some of those goals.
Yeah, it was captured on video. Okay, so he's Thierry Henry. He's very modest in his self-description. He makes himself sound more like a tap-in merchant. But he is a wonderful footballer. Non-league for our non-English language football listeners is sort of below the top 4 divisions. And Mark plays mostly in about, I think, the 7th tier of English football.
It's amateur league, right?
Yeah, I think you might get the odd few quid here. And he plays for the West Midlands police team. And weirdly, he plays for them before he joins the police. So he then joins the police, partly through contacts in the team. And Mark would go around the house wearing this Real Madrid number 5 shirt in the Zidane era when Zidane wore the 5 there. And Jude, as a kid, would say to him, "What's this number 5 you're wearing?" And Mark would say, "Don't worry, one day we'll watch it on YouTube." And now Jude plays for Real Madrid with number 5. So everything is destiny, people.
Jude's mum, Denise, she works in HR and she's been a constant in his life. When Jude moves to Germany, Denise goes with him. Mark stays at home with Job. Now she's also in Madrid, and most often you see Denise driving Jude to and from training because as far as I can tell, he still hasn't got his driving license. But he speaks in glowing terms about his mum, says she's the most important variable in his footballing career, which is a little bit different from a lot of other players who we hear about who often talk about their dads. Dads are becoming such an important variable in a lot of the stories that we tell on this podcast. So I think it's important to stress that for Jude, even though his dad was the guy that got him into football, his mum is the one that has allowed this very unique path to the top to flourish because she's accompanied her very young son all along the way.
Apparently, in the early years, his dad would kick a ball to him and Jude wouldn't be interested in kicking, but would quite like to throw it. But when he's about 5 or 6, he starts to kick a ball. So at the age of 7, he enters the Birmingham City Academy. And he stays there for many years. And so, of course, he grows up hating Aston Villa, local rivals.
Obviously.
I'm not going to say rightly. I'm not going to sit in judgment here.
No, he's completely right. Let's not get it twisted.
Luckily, we were able to get an interview with one of the Birmingham City youth coaches, Paul Robinson. And Paul, who'll come on in a sec, coaches Jude when Jude is about 15, and already the club see him as being on the brink of the first team. So he needs, as it were, some extra lessons.
Let's roll the clip.
Paul, welcome. Just tell us, what was your kind of first impression when you set eyes on him?
When I first met Jude, I found he was very shy, but very determined. You could see he had that little bit of attitude about him where he knew that he was good, but obviously he just had to taper that to get to the levels of where he is today. I then eventually worked closely with Jude to understand what that potential was all about.
You gave him one-on-one training sessions. I mean, I'm struggling to think with somebody as complete as he is, what you would be focusing on, what you felt he needed.
Technique, ball control, movements of what the game's all about, really, in getting himself in positions on the pitch that he's very comfortable with the ball at his feet. So again, it's seeing that picture, and Jude was very good at that. Jude could see numerous pictures on the football pitch, and when I say pictures, I mean before the ball's even come to him, he knows where his next pass is, or his body position is perfect in knowing that there's a player coming towards him and he can shift the ball into a different direction. When you worked with him closely with Jude, you understood that his vision was excellent for the young age of 15, and then it was just about developing that.
Was he good at listening? That's the sense I get, that although he's immensely gifted, he's able to listen to what the coach is telling him.
Outstanding listener, took everything on board and would do exactly what you would ask him to do, and if not more, because there's some things you can't teach people and it comes naturally. And with Jude, he was naturally gifted at doing things on the football pitch that other kids couldn't do. And yeah, it was a joy to watch. And it was, like you say, you always wanted people like Jude on the football because you know that he would make things happen, but also that he would win you games with his individual brilliance.
The club retired his number 22 when he was 16 years old. That seems extraordinary. The club must have kind of had a sense this boy is going all the way.
Yeah, and obviously they believed that no one else was going to wear the same shirt as what Jude did and to go on and do what Jude did. So yeah, great testament to the club to retire the shirt. I'd like to see it opened one day because I think it gives younger kids great hope in that they can wear the number 22 shirt and go on and have good careers as well.
How would you describe him now as a person, not a footballer?
The same kid that I worked with when I was at Birmingham. He's well-grounded. He doesn't change. He's very respectful. He comes across as the ultimate professional. And that's what I love about Jude. He doesn't get carried away. And that's why we're talking about his parents in the background with making sure that he's doing all the right things. Yes, there's times where he's going to need to switch off and be with his friends and family, and he can enjoy himself and he's doing the right things, and it's keeping that out of the limelight, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that will be looking to try and get things on him like they do, like the media will want to do. But for now, at the moment, Jude's he's doing all the right things, and he's well protected, which is great.
That was really interesting, Simon. And I was struck by how much of Jude's early footballing life, even when he's a young teenager, is so carefully constructed, including his choice of shirt number when he's at Birmingham City. So he sits down with one of his coaches and they decide together to pick the number 22. It's not an obvious number for a midfielder to have, but the rationale behind picking number 22 is that it will reflect, and it does come to reflect almost as a prophecy, all of the variations of midfield positions that he can play. So he plays the number 4, he can play the number 8, and he can play the number 10. If you add those all together, they become 22.
That's how you became economics editor at the time.
Yeah, by adding up. I actually can't add up anything.
That was the job interview. So the 4 is the holding midfield, the 8 is the box-to-box guy, and the 10 is the playmaker. And Jude is all those things. And as we're starting to see as well, he's also a number 9. So maybe his number really should be 31.
I don't want to get too into numerology. You know, some people are like fully obsessed with... No, anyway.
But you say the career is carefully constructed, and it's partly because everyone understands it's going to be a career. There's no dreams of stardom. It's like Mbappe. There's the knowledge that he's going to be a star. He's the captain of every England youth team, the under-15s, the under-17s, and everyone is kind of at Birmingham just waiting for him to be almost legally old enough to play in the first team and then very quickly go. And everyone else is scouting him.
They are. I listened to a fascinating interview with a former Chelsea youth scout who now works for Arsenal, Yusuf Sajjad, and he describes the absolutely massive amounts of information, the volumes and volumes of scouting reports that Chelsea have on Bellingham before he even makes his debut, age 16 with Birmingham City. He says by the age of about 14, Chelsea have 63 scouting reports collected by about 25 scouts whose job it is to watch Jude, not just watch him, but to analyse every single part of his character, his game and his development, including the fact that a lot of the scouts would write down the fact that when he celebrates, he does exactly the same celebration. We will talk about that later, but I'm going to say perhaps the greatest celebration in football.
It's a little bit like Christ the Redeemer above Rio de Janeiro. Yeah,
there we are, the Christ the Redeemer.
So we've already seen here there's an alternative universe where Jude joins Chelsea and has his career ruined and is now probably, kind of sitting in the stands watching them lose.
Untrue, because of course Chelsea are building one of the best academies in football at that time. But actually, I think the story is that Chelsea never even get close, but they make a lot of effort. One of the things that really struck me is that, so these academies, they're all fighting for the same kind of boys, right? Chelsea, Manchester United, Arsenal, these are all the dream clubs that any English boy wants to play for. And Chelsea would try and make themselves stand out by seducing players like Jude Bellingham. And one of the things that they do is that they mock up FIFA graphics of him wearing a Chelsea shirt, which is brilliant because that's reality for a lot of these young kids, right? Playing FIFA in the colours of XYZ shirt. So Chelsea do go to these lengths, but they're actually never really in the running to sign Jude Bellingham. And that's because the team that everyone thinks he's going to is Manchester United, Simon.
Yeah, and he's invited there and he's met by former legendary United captain Brian Robson. Eric Cantona somehow is also there. Cantona is actually now a singer, I've heard. He's been doing a concert tour of Holland. Somebody told me he's not a good singer, but it's still amazing to see.
He's probably still the best singer in Holland, let's be honest.
And with them also is Alex Ferguson. So there's this kid and his family, and he's met by Robson, Cantona and Ferguson. So you think, obviously he's going to sign for them, right? But United do not seem to handle this event brilliantly.
Fumbled the bag.
Yeah. And what's this story that Ferguson's only allowed to speak to him for 1 minute?
So this is bizarre. So Ferguson is not Manchester United's manager. Ole is United manager at this point. But for some reason... Ole Gunnar Solskjaer,
not so legendary, the less legendary United manager.
Legendary player, less legendary manager of Manchester United. So it's been reported afterwards because this become quite a neuralgic moment in the scouting history of Manchester United when they missed Jude Bellingham. But John Murtough, who's now the departing director of football at United, because of the strange hierarchies, he doesn't want Sir Alex Ferguson to be speaking too much in the meeting with Jude and his parents, right?
Because Ferguson doesn't work for the club. And who is Ferguson anyway? Some kind of amateur pensioner buffer.
Jude's 15. He doesn't know who Sir Alex Ferguson is. This guy's dinosaur, even older than Roy of the Rovers, right? And so apparently Sir Alex Ferguson doesn't get a chance to say much in the meeting. And ultimately, the way that this unravels is that United just don't give enough assurances to Jude and his incredibly, ambitious parents that he's going to get any playing time with the first team. They just refuse to give him that guarantee that they think that Jude thinks that he deserves. And apparently Sir Alex Ferguson has been fuming about this ever since. And this will go down as one of the big misses of United. The other one, of course, being Haaland.
They also missed Haaland and they missed Mbappe because loyal listeners will remember from our Mbappe episode that Ryan Giggs said, we kept coming to Louis van Gaal, the then manager, saying there's this kid, Mbappe, he's 16 years old, you should definitely sign him. And Van Gaal wasn't interested. So there is a United with Mbappe, Haaland and Bellingham in another universe.
And there's another universe where United is winning the treble right now.
Yeah. So he does not go to Chelsea. He does not go to United. He plays 44 games for Birmingham. And then because, like the Mbappes, the parents are very switched on. They're looking for the best career move and not the biggest club. So Mbappe's first professional club is Monaco because the family decide that's where he'll get playing time. So at 16, he becomes a starter at Monaco. And Bellingham, at 16, signs for Dortmund because Dortmund is already becoming known as the best place for a young talent to progress to world-class status. Some names: Haaland,
Sancho, Hakimi, Gundogan.
Lewandowski started there.
Lewandowski. And I mean, I think the crucial factor, the variable, is that Dortmund are always in the Champions League.
Yeah. So the family think, are we going to sit in the stands at United or are we going to play for Dortmund? And so they make this very un-English choice to leave English football, which almost no English player voluntarily does.
I've got a slightly different take because I know that, Simon, you're very dedicated to this image of parochial English people.
No, not at all, not at all. Some of my best friends are English people.
But I actually think that for players for kids like Jude, the Bundesliga feels a bit closer. La Liga also feels close. I think Serie A less so. And it's probably because they all grow up watching the Champions League. That is the foremost global competition. And they all play FIFA, so they all know the players of the clubs of Getafe and, Leipzig. And these are sort of, there is much more exposure to this kind of foreignness, which has never happened before. But it happens in the age of social media, in the age of gaming, and the age where the Champions League is the only football tournament of any note to watch every single year. And it's the pinnacle of footballing achievement. And then there's some sort of, I think, idiosyncratic factors which make the Bundesliga feel closer to Jude Bellingham. I think one of them that is not remarked upon too much is that he is roommates with Jamal Musiala. When the two of them are playing for England, Jamal subsequently chooses Germany for his national team.
So at the World Cup in 2022, Jamal is playing for Germany and Jude for England. Yeah,
exactly. And Jamal at this point is left Chelsea, where he's one of the most scouted kids in the world. Even though he's born in Germany and has a German background, he chooses to go to Bayern Munich. And Jude sees Jamal basically breaking through into the Bayern Munich team. One of the figures that's really important and arguably the trailblazer for the path that Jude then follows is Jadon Sancho, who chooses to leave Manchester City and to spurn English clubs that want him and go to Dortmund and then have an absolutely brilliant season in 2019-2020 when he's one of the most exciting watched footballers in the world. And there was that period in the pandemic in 2020 where we couldn't watch any football, but the Bundesliga starts before any other league. So there's like 2 weeks when the whole world is watching the Bundesliga and all they're watching is Jadon Sancho on the counter-attack scoring incredible goals, incredible assists. So I think the appeal of the Bundesliga and Dortmund, there's a unique sort of constellation of factors which I think makes it less of a weird choice for Bellingham than it would have been perhaps if it happened 5 years earlier when everyone would say, this is bizarre. Why would anyone go to the Bundesliga?
And there was Mason Mount as well, just across the border in the Netherlands, playing at Vitesse Arnhem.
Yeah, Reece Nelson.
Madueke at
Madueke goes to PSV, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe you're right. I've missed something in this kind of very youngest, newest generation of English football. It's so hard to get a regular spot in a good Premier League team that maybe the first spell abroad is becoming more normal.
So Jude Bellingham is just turned 17 and he's becoming a product of what I think is a really, truly globalized labour market for footballers, and it's become a very European marketplace for footballing talent because clubs all over the world, including the likes of Dortmund and others, are able to pick some of the creme de la creme of academies in England, pick them off and make these players into superstars.
How will Dortmund turn this kid into one of the greatest footballers of our time a mere 3 years later? Find out after the break.
So, you want to be a marketer. It's easy. You just have to score a ton of leads and figure out a way to turn them all into customers. Plus, manage a dozen channels, write a million blogs, and launch 100 campaigns all at once. When that's done, simply make your socials go viral and bring in record profits. No sweat. Okay, fine. It's a lot of sweat. But with HubSpot's AI-powered marketing tools, launching benchmark-breaking campaigns is easier than ever. Get started at HubSpot.com/marketers.
This is a reminder that you're listening to Heroes and Humans of Football with me, Mehreen Khan.
And me, Simon Cooper.
Welcome back. So you join us as Jude Bellingham is a 17-year-old who's just left England to play in the Bundesliga for Dortmund. Now, this is a team which has, as we've already mentioned in previous episodes, a cult status among footballing hipsters, but also a pretty good team, and it's stacked full of young talent, including one, Erling Haaland. Simon, explain what Dortmund is like at this particularly unique moment in their history, which was only a few seasons ago.
Yeah, so it's 2020. Dortmund are post-Jurgen Klopp, post-Thomas Tuchel. They are, in some ways, the most popular team in Germany. They often get 70, 80,000 fans. They have the largest average attendances of any club in Europe in some seasons, more than Barca and Real Madrid.
Definitely the most popular team outside Germany, let's be honest.
Yeah, it's very kind of throwback football because you have this gelbe Wand, the yellow wall of, 10,000 people standing on the south stand. And so cheap tickets, it's a working class part of Germany in the Ruhrgebiet, which used to be mining, but now is sort of post-industrial. People really love football there, even more than in the rest of Germany. And it's not a team that can compete with Bayern on money, but they do have these young players. And as you say, there is this Norwegian who looks a bit like a very large milk bottle or an overexposed Polaroid photograph, who's been knocking in phenomenal quantities of goals. And when Bellingham arrives age 17, obviously he's straight into the first team. There's no kind of grooming period. He's ready. They put him in defensive midfield, kind of veteran. He looks like a veteran defensive midfielder. When you see him play, you think he's 32. And then when off the field, you say, oh, he's 14.
He arrives in a team where Sancho and Haaland are becoming the most exciting duo in world football, but everyone knows that both Sancho and Haaland are going to be leaving within the next 12 to 24 months. That's the business model. So I think Bellingham enters at a pretty good time because all eyes are not on Jude Bellingham. They're actually still on Sancho and Haaland, but he knows that eventually he will have to take up the mantle of being the young superstar once these guys have gone.
And he becomes known as the player who will stay longest after training to pose for selfies, to sign people's shirts. And he says, for me, signing a shirt, it takes a few seconds and it's something that person might treasure forever. So he seems to kind of identify with fans. He remembers what it's like to be a fan watching football.
He quickly goes viral for doing that thing of giving the young kid his shirt, and then the young kid is in tears and, is jumping up and down to their parents. And this becomes a kind of ritual in every home game. And now you see it, and I think maybe I'm being a bit cynical, now it's become an obvious viral opportunity for footballers to get good press. But I think when Bellingham was doing it, it was a genuine sense of he resonates with the young fans. Within 3 seasons, he's gone from being that kid who played against Wayne Rooney, his idol at Birmingham City, and he said he was so dumbstruck by being on the same pitch against Wayne Rooney, to now being the kid that other children, much younger than him, look as a demigod on the pitch. And he still appreciates that feeling because it was only him a few years ago. And so I think there is that kind of authenticity about Bellingham, which I think is now being cynically milked by lots of other football players because it was always a nice photo opportunity. But I think when Bellingham does it, it was really coming from the heart. I don't think it's too generous of us to say that.
I think one interesting thing about him is he's a performer in the sense that he's very aware of fans. He's aware that he's playing in a stadium and there are people watching him, and he relates and responds to those people. So there's this fantastic video where Haaland has scored again, surprise, and they all run to the corner flag to celebrate, and fans are throwing plastic or paper cups of beer at them. And Bellingham catches a beer cup out of the sky, takes a swig, then spits it out because he's a professional. But he's kind of interacting with the audience, which is, I think, part of who he is.
And is a reflection of the fact that he was really crap at cricket when he was younger, but he was determined to get so good at it, and he becomes so good at it, I think he becomes the best cricketer in his school, because that one-handed catch is quite something.
He looks like a slip fielder.
Yeah, he makes it look easy, but yeah, it's a movie moment. Simon, you've also been spending a lot of time listening to Jude Bellingham talking about his time at the club in lots of sort of promos and podcasts that he did while he was at Dortmund.
Yeah, so the kind of longest document of Bellinghamiana I've been able to find is this interview he does for the Dortmund Club podcast, where I think it's 1 or 2 ex-players interviewing him in English, but they also have fans' questions recorded in German. And they play the fans' questions. And Bellingham, he's been at Dortmund about 2 or 3 years at this point. He can get the gist of the fans' questions. So he can't really speak much German, but he understands bits of it. And I was interested in his German pronunciation, which is very good. So he has very few words, but he pronounces them well, which to me is a sign of musicality, because people who are musical have good accents. And being an old person, I was reminded of the Beatles, again, teenage boys of that age, going to Hamburg for a couple of years at the start of their careers. In fact, doing a kind of Jude Bellingham before Jude Bellingham 60 years earlier, where they play in Hamburg all the time. And the Beatles didn't learn much German, I suspect, like Bellingham, but they sang a few songs in German. And of course, they sing it with perfect accents because they're the Beatles. And so there's a little bit of that in Bellingham.
I was really struck by that podcast as well, because when you have young footballers who are doing interviews, they're always about the young footballer. Jude Bellingham probably spends around 30 to 40% of that interview talking about his teammates, the characteristics of his teammates, the dynamics of his teammates. I mean, if you don't know the Dortmund squad, it's difficult to know who he's talking about because he's speaking in their first names, how he bumps into them on holiday, how this guy's a great guy. They all go to Ibiza
together. So footballers all bump into each other on holiday because they're all either in Ibiza or in Dubai.
But he has, I would say, that is a reflection of an emotional intelligence which is rare for any teenager to have, let alone a teenage footballer who is basically the centre of the universe at Dortmund. And yet he spends most of the time not talking about himself, which I thought was pretty striking, and something about his character, which we will go on to speak about as well.
I mean, interviewing young footballers, which I did a bit in the past, is very hard because...
Like pulling teeth.
I think the worst interview I ever did was with Antoine Griezmann, But I think, to be fair, he deliberately was giving me a bad interview. Just every question he answered with cliches.
Did you get trolled? I would troll you if I was Antoine
Well, he
Griezmann.
just did cliches. Is that trolling? I guess.
Yeah,
He was deliberately humiliating me. It wasn't pure stupidity. Sometimes it's just the person has nothing to say. Like I interviewed the young Neymar, who was a nice person, I felt, but somebody who had absolutely nothing to say. Bellingham's not like that. I mean, I agree. I was struck by how he talks about his teammates, and he repeatedly uses the word love. Like, I love him. I love Erling.
I love him.
I love him.
Sorry.
That wasn't bad, actually.
I love Erling. I love Erling.
He doesn't have a parody Birmingham accent.
No, he
It's
doesn't.
a tinge.
I can only
It's
do
tinge.
one. I can only do one version, which is like the extreme.
But yeah, he repeatedly talks about the player, each player's positive qualities, and then he says often that he loves them. And I found it quite touching.
Speaking about what you conceive of his musicality, he's also got like solidly classical taste in music, as we learned in that interview.
Yeah, it's quite old-fashioned, his tastes in music. So he talks about listening to 60s, 70s and 80s music because he says they sang better then. So he relaxes to that kind of music. And then he says he pumps himself up pre-match with 90s rap.
So I think that this is a reflection of the fact that Jude Bellingham is not really a very good representation for his generation, which is Gen Z. And in another future episode we're going to be talking about Erling Haaland, his teammate, who I think really exhibits some classic characteristics of what Gen Zers are like. I think Jude Bellingham is a much more kind of timeless figure. I think he could exist in any era of football. The way that he plays, the way that he carries himself. For one, the lack of his relative self-centeredness makes him a bit of an exception for his generation too. I think there is something really, really timeless about Jude Bellingham. That means that he doesn't listen to Future or like Lil Baby and all this kind of crap sort of music that basically most footballers listen to when they want to get themselves G'd up. And he makes a point of saying that he doesn't think that stuff has any longevity. I think Jude Bellingham is a bit of a throwback. And maybe like his idol Zidane, I think he's timeless.
Well, he says his favourite film is Pulp Fiction, which for those of us who were young in 1994 was the great film of 1994. And I think it's partly because they live this very sheltered existence, stars, because they can't really go outside in the age of selfies. Everyone's photographing them whenever they do. And so he probably spends much more time than people his age with his parents and has absorbed, I think, some of the older person's worldview. I'm also struck by his look, that his look is also quite timeless. So if you just put up a picture of him and said this is 1993 or 1983, that would be credible. He doesn't necessarily look like a figure from 2024, does he?
Yeah, but he does have a skin fade. And I think that's very important because his haircut has become what Beckham's haircuts used to be. Like, I can't move on social media without seeing young kids saying, I want a Jude Bellingham. It's become a thing.
Yeah, it's funny because you say in England, they say, I want a Jude Bellingham. In Spain, they call it a belly cut. El belly cut, porfa. So in Spain, it has this special nickname, and he flies in his now world-famous hairdresser from Birmingham to do the belly cut. But also Camavinga's brother has set up as a hairdresser in Madrid, and he kind of keeps it updated in between the Birmingham barber's visits.
It's a very lucrative profession being a barber because footballers get their hair trimmed once a week, minimum. So before every game, they make sure that the skin fade is on point. You should get a skin fade, Simon.
Yeah, I'd look great. I'd be a new role model. The other thing about him that seems to me timeless is that he doesn't have tattoos. I don't think I've ever seen a Gen Z celeb without tattoos. I didn't know that existed or was allowed.
You know, this whole schema that we've dreamt up is going to be blown out of the water if he dyes his hair blonde for the Euros.
Yeah, he's going to get a
Jude.
mohawk and he's going to get a neck tattoo. Yeah.
Do you remember when Foden did it because he wanted to look like Gaza ahead of the World Cup?
He wanted to look like Gaza. I thought looking like Gaza was a horrible accident that shouldn't happen to anyone.
I don't know, some of these kids. So I think, so we've described so far that Jude Bellingham's life at Dortmund is basically a movie, right? He's catching beer bottles from the crowd. The man can do no wrong. But actually, I don't think his life at Dortmund is that kind of fairy tale because he's actually playing around players who he already at his tender age, 17, 18, 19, he's much better than.
Yeah, because he's very quickly emerged as quite exceptional and also becoming an England regular. And he's got this unusual combination, but it's quite English. You see it with the best English players of very high skill and also very high kind of aggression, hard and fast and skillful. So Wayne Rooney and Steven Gerrard are examples of this. Gerrard has talked about how he loved tackling. He loved the physical sensation of tackling. And I'm going to get really pompous here just for 1 second. I know it's not like me. But think of the word Bellingham. It has bellum in it, the Latin word for war, and it has bellus in it, the Latin word for beautiful or pretty.
Wow.
And he's both. He's bellum and he's bellus. He's war and he's beautiful. I think you think of Italian bella figura. So I think the name was obviously chosen carefully by destiny to convey this kind of perfect array of qualities, which he's exhibiting from age 17 with England as well. He just very quickly, unremarked, becomes an England regular. But as you say, there are players in that Dortmund team who should not really be in the same team as Jude Bellingham.
Can I just say, so we've done numerology, now we've done nominative determinism. Next week, Simon's going to talk about homeopathy.
Yeah, we've got Kabbalah episode coming as well, yeah.
So going back to that, then not everyone is as good as him. There is that moment which I think you can watch everywhere, which is when I started taking notice of perhaps the darker side of Jude Bellingham, or the frustrations, is when I think Dortmund are playing Rangers in the Europa Cup. They're going to get knocked out. Rangers not particularly good. Dortmund are better on paper. But one of his teammates, Nico Schulz, is, basically a simple forward pass to Bellingham, and Schultz messes it up, and Jude Bellingham goes absolutely apoplectic. And you do not need to be a lip reader to see what he's saying. He was like, you can't get an effing pass off your effing shit every effing time.
You are a lip reader.
Yeah, I am a lip reader. I didn't have to be one. And actually, the first time I ever saw Bellingham play in the flesh was last season when a very bad Chelsea side played Dortmund in the second leg of a knockout game in the Champions League. Dortmund are 1-0 up from the first leg. This is Chelsea under Graham Potter, and probably the only rare triumph that we had in that side with Graham Potter. Eventually, Chelsea win 2-0. They knock Dortmund out. And Bellingham, he doesn't have a particularly great game, but he takes the loss really, really badly. He's sulking. After the game, he's trying to pick a fight with Cucurella. His body language is terrible. He pushes the camera away when, the camera guys go on after the pitch to get close-up shots. He smashes a water bottle, and he talks about losing in a way that I think a lot of younger people handle losing. And he says that it feels like the end of the world for him when they lose. But I think that's also a reflection of the fact that he's better than a lot of his teammates.
Yeah.
And he is in a side which historically will now be known as one of the biggest bottlers in the Bundesliga, because Jude Bellingham could have left Dortmund on a high. All they had to do was win their final game against Mainz, and they would have won the Bundesliga for the first time in over a decade, and they don't manage to do it. Jude is on the bench for that game. He's injured, but you see him in streams of tears at the end of that game. He's not a good loser. He is in a side which historically has a reputation for kind of never really making it to the never really getting the cigar. But that will change very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, so he's 18, 19. And look, most of us were not fit to be released into society with ankle tags at that age. And I'm very glad that nothing I did at that age is on YouTube. But, so he has these moments of immaturity. But mostly, I think we can credit him with having done a reasonably good job of growing up in public.
Definitely. And let's be honest, we're kind of forgiving his petulance because we think that that's just a reflection of the fact that how great he is. And I think we can only say that knowing what happens afterwards and knowing already at that level that how much he's superior to his peers. I think if you're crap and petulant, you don't get away with it.
Being crap and petulant is a poor combination, but one does know people like that. So he's coming to the end of his Dortmund time. It's the end of the 22-23 season. So only a year ago. And essentially what he is, if you look at it statistically, is he's the mature Patrick Vieira. So StatsBomb, this tactical website, they took his stats on things like interceptions, tackles, what they call deep progressions, where you drive forward with the ball. Bellingham's stats as a defensive midfielder his last year at Dortmund, and they say the player he most resembles is the 27-year-old Patrick Vieira. And of course, the 27-year-old Patrick Vieira was the best in the world in that position. And Jude is already there. And that is the player that Madrid are buying. And looking back, it's weird, he's been at this club with Haaland. So the two of the three best players of their age group, and haven't really won anything, but he has very clearly emerged.
They win the DFB Pokal. They won the German Cup.
The DFB Pokal is not to be sniffed at. Yeah, that's good. But this is Jude Bellingham. And so he is, in the words of his manager, Edin Terzic, the Dortmund manager, he is the oldest 19-year-old player worldwide, which I think is a good description. And he's just gone way past Dortmund. And remember, they only paid, I think, 25 million euros for him. So like buying Haaland, I think we can say that was that was a good buy.
So in his final season at Dortmund, where he knows that he's surrounded by not particularly great players, he also has a mid-season break, like most players do, because he's at the World Cup. And so Bellingham very quickly becomes a fixture of this England team, Simon, although he does talk a little bit about how nervous he was to meet certain players in the England squad.
So he's 17, he comes into the squad and he knows he's good enough, everyone knows he's good enough, but he's anxious because there is an Aston Villa player in the squad. So it's like you walk into the changing room and there's somebody with horns who is the devil. And this figure is Jack Grealish. Grealish at this point is the hero of Aston Villa. He's a Brummie lad, like Bellingham, but he plays for Darth Vader. He is in with evil in Bellingham's mind. And Bellingham is very anxious about this. He's standing in the lunch queue on his first day with England. Grealish is ahead of him. So it's like you're in the lunch queue behind Darth Vader. And then Grealish turns around, sees Jude, comes over, hugs him, and they have lunch together. And it turns out that Grealish, he's not evil. He's a good guy.
Do you want me to reenact the conversation?
Go on.
You're on there, Jude.
For Birmingham-based listeners, I was not party to that.
No, but let's be honest. Okay, how could anyone be scared of Jack Grealish? I mean, the guy's he's a puppy dog. But one thing I do appreciate about Bellingham, but we mentioned the Villa thing, is that his like completely egregious sectarianism, which he adopts. I think the Aston Villa one is natural to him because he's a Birmingham City boy, and at Dortmund he does this to Schalke. Like he will take any opportunity to make Schalke the butt of his jokes in press conferences. There's one great one where he's talking to a journalist after a game, and they talk about Job, and they said it would be great if Job also joined Dortmund, and Jude's like, well, I don't know, because Job's going to be, he's got his own career path. Of course, I would love him to play for Dortmund. I don't think it's ever going to happen, but let's be honest, he's never going to play for Schalke. I mean, it's just, there's no need for it. But I do really appreciate that. And it's just a brilliant sort of cheat code to get the fans on side, is by exhibiting this like incredibly stupid sectarianism towards your local rival.
So he's gone with England to Qatar. He's a first team regular. He kind of holds the team together from the pivote and defensive midfield position, or he plays playmaker, whatever they want. When Harry Kane, the kind of England senior pro, misses the penalty against France that will doom England, Kane sinks down in despair. Mbappe laughs. And the person who comes up to comfort Kane is 19-year-old Jude Bellingham. He's already the kind of mature supervisor of this whole business.
Yeah, and fast forward about 18 months, and Jude Bellingham is whispering in Harry Kane's ear as he's about to take a penalty for Bayern Munich against Real Madrid. And he got into a bit of trouble for that. But again, I think that shows that ultimately when Jude puts on the colours of whatever team he's playing against, he's all in. He got a bit of stick for that, but apparently Harry says that he didn't remember anything that Jude was whispering. I'm sure he was just trying to put him off. It's after the World Cup. Jude Bellingham has played his last game for Dortmund. It's the summer of 2023, and he is the subject of feverish speculation. There's talk that Liverpool really want him. Steven Gerrard, Jurgen Klopp, everyone's spoken about the fact that they've been secretly tapping up Jude. Pep Guardiola, a lot of the Man City players, including Jack Grealish, are sending him text messages every week saying, you got to come to City. But I think it was probably always destined to be Real Madrid, Simon. They get him for now looks like the bargain price of 100 million euros. And he puts on the magic white T-shirt, and I mean, the rest seems to have been history.
Madrid is also, in football lore, it's where the very greatest players go. So if that's who you think you are, then you need to go to Madrid. And again, it's quite a brave move. You're going to a club that demands world-classness, and you're going to a foreign country where you don't speak the language. So again, he's never done the logical thing for a great English player of signing for one of the top English clubs. Even though if he had gone to City or Chelsea now, he would have kind of walked into the first team. He wouldn't kind of get lost in the squad. No, he makes the tough choice of going to Madrid. Interestingly, his brother Job also moves that same summer. Job, who has become the second youngest ever player to play for Birmingham after Jude, Job signs for Sunderland in the Championship. And it's a kind of difficult thing, isn't it, if one brother is better than the other? And it's very hard to discuss at home. So Jude has often spoken of Job as the person he's closest to, the person who he can confide in more than anyone else. And he says he never wants Jude to be seen as the brother of, but that is what Job has always got all his life. And Job now plays for Sunderland with a shirt that says Job on the back and not Bellingham, because I think it's just too heavy a name to play with. He needs to be himself and make his own career. If
Bellingham is the kind of magnanimous big brother that we're making him out to be, maybe he also thinks that if I go to Spain, I basically allow Jobe to play in England, and therefore there's a bit more distance. The media coverage is less. I'm not saying that the reason you go to Real Madrid is to help Jobe, but it does actually, I think it really does help Jobe, because there's only one Bellingham in England, and that's Jobe.
It probably helps Jobe as a side effect. He arrives in Madrid and, as I said, he's sort of been signed as Patrick Vieira. Madrid know he can do more than that, but he's been the Patrick Vieira of Dortmund most of the time.
He thinks he's Zidane and they think he's Patrick Vieira.
But in fact, it turns out he's Platini. I mean, I think Platini is the way he's been playing. He comes to Madrid, he suddenly turns into a number 10 with Rodrigo and Vini playing up front. And Bellingham has this gift, like Platini did, of coming in from number 10 into the box, appearing unmarked. So when he's in front of goal, he appears in the right place and he scores. And I've been watching videos of his goals, and it's really striking how many different goals he scores. And that is a mark of quality. I can't think of many people like that. There's a lob from outside the box in a friendly against United. There's rebounds where he's the quickest to the ball, like I guess his father would have been. He has this massive long-range drive with the outside of his right boot, top corner. He can shoot really hard with his left. When you see him shoot with his left, you think he might actually be two-footed. So he looks complete as a goal scorer, and that's just Jude the goal scorer. That's not Jude the defensive midfielder or Jude the playmaker or the Frank Lampard figure. He wasn't meant to be this goal scorer, and he becomes that.
And none of this was inevitable, because that summer, all I remember was being the summer that Kylian Mbappe fails to go to Real Madrid and Karim Benzema decides that he's surprisingly going to leave Real Madrid. So there is a space, and that is a space that he occupies with Ancelotti, who gives him the confidence to say, you can do this. And it is quite a unique constellation of factors, which means that he ends up scoring the hatful of goals that he would he have done? I mean, it's a counterfactual, but if Benzema's still there as a big hulking number 9, and if Mbappe's there, the main guy who's kind of probably going to make sure that Vinny's on the other side or whatever, I mean, he does benefit from the fact that this is a team in flux that summer.
Yeah, there's not a real sense forward, although Mbappe can play in other positions. So I think when Mbappe comes, they will find a very good modus vivendi. And of course, Jude could have been great in other positions. But yeah, it was sort of accidental. Now, you say that Ancelotti gave him the confidence to play that position. I don't think he needs someone to give him confidence. I think Ancelotti gave him the freedom, yeah. So he's praised Ancelotti for that, for letting him roam, for letting him pop up unexpectedly. Simeone, the Atletico manager, says he's very hard to mark because he suddenly ghosts in. Jude also from midfield, he does his defensive work. He really likes doing his defensive work as well. And Ancelotti says, he hasn't surprised me as a player. He surprised us as a person, he said. He's surprised us that he's 20 years old and he's so mature, so humble, so serious.
On the goal scoring, I was listening to an interview with Michael Ballack, who of course played in the Bundesliga and then went to Chelsea and was the kind of a bit more of a leisurely, strolling box-to-box midfielder, but was always the guy that ran the most kilometres on the pitch. And the thing that Ballack said is that Jude Bellingham is already way better than I ever was at his age, because that instinct of knowing where to be to score the goal, I learnt that in my later 20s, and I matured as a player when I slowed down. Then I developed this goal instinct, and Ballack, I think, ages really well with time because he learns that role. And he was like, this guy's already got it. Jude is already at the ceiling that I think Ballack thought he could never exceed at the age of 20 in La Liga. And I think it's quite a useful comparison to see just how streets ahead he is of people that we also now consider to be world-class box-to-box midfielders.
Well, former great players often have express that surprise about Bellingham, that they were not there at that age, is exactly what they say. So Rio Ferdinand says, the best players of my generation, I suppose he's thinking of people like Gerrard and Lampard, they were not what Bellingham is at 20. And Gianfranco Zola, your hero, phrased it even better. He said on TV, on a program that Jude was on, 20 years old, says Zola, I was still drinking the milk from my mother, which raises all sorts of questions about the Zola family. And Jude quite rightly bursts out laughing.
But he can't have been drinking that milk because he's only 5'3", because if he was drinking milk, he would have
Well, he only started at age 20, so it was post-growth. But I think what Zola and Ballack are saying is, I've seen great players, but I haven't seen a player this mature, this complete, so young. So, I mean, Messi was not the complete player at 20. I think at 21, the 2008-9 season is when Messi, as they say, explodes. And so Cristiano took years at United to become the player that we got to know. So, I mean, the autumn for him is perfect. And later he picks up a couple of injuries. He hasn't been quite as dominant since. Xavi, the Barcelona's coach, said that in the autumn he was in a state of grace. And so kind of every ball he hit went in, and it's almost impossible. Nobody sustains that except Messi. But he has become arguably the most important player in the Madrid team with Vini. He feels what great players do, which is that they're responsible for the result. So most players in football feel they're responsible for their position, their task. I have to fulfill my task and then hope that we win. And the Bellingham or the Zidane figure thinks, or the Messi thinks, I have to win this game for us. If we're one down, it's on me to make something happen. And he's talked about having that sense of responsibility, being that figure in the side already to produce the big moments. It will be a very odd final for him because he's playing for Madrid against Dortmund. And Dortmund are the guys that he describes as the people he loves. You know, many of these people he was playing with, sharing a changing room, but also hanging out, going bowling, spending time with a year ago. You know, a young lad who's not married, who's in a new country, gets a lot of his social life from his teammates, and those teammates are going to be against him in the biggest game of all their lives.
Are we going to see that strange phenomenon where both sets of teams in the Champions League final are going to be cheering for Jude Bellingham?
I somehow think Dortmund fans are not going to be cheering for Jude Bellingham.
I think that when Bellingham's name is announced over the announcer, that the Dortmund fans are going to cheer. If, let's say, you know, it's looking likely that Real Madrid will win this game, they should win it on paper, that they will not begrudge watching Jude Bellingham lift the Champions League trophy. That's what I think.
It could be. I mean, he's a very popular guy, is my sense. You know, I have never been a fan of English football, but I like him. I haven't encountered much kind of anti-Bellingham sentiment.
No, there was that bit of petulance, and there was a brief period at Dortmund where there were some rumours that he was getting too big for the club, but I think he was just getting frustrated at the limitations of Dortmund. But he leaves in a brilliant fashion. And let's be honest, I think Dortmund are used to losing a lot of their talent, and they will say that they were the team that made Jude Bellingham. So yeah, I think we might see this bizarre phenomenon of watching him.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, so this is the point in the pod where we usually talk about legacy. Of course, Bellingham, we should talk more about future, what happens to him, where he goes, what he has become so far and what he will become.
I think, you know, as we've established in this episode, that Bellingham really, really is built different. He's poised, he's incredibly thoughtful in his post-match interviews to the point where it's almost become a meme on the internet that this guy is so well-spoken. And people are marvelling at the old head that sits on his very young shoulders. And I think there's something to be said about the post-match interviews, because some people will put this down to media training. That he's very good at, you know, telling the journalists what they want to hear because he's been trained. But actually media training, and Simon, you'll know this, produces cliches and hackneyed phrases and basically people saying a lot but without saying anything at all. I don't think it's media training. I think it's a genuine reflection of how he's been brought up by his parents to present himself.
I would say he's well-spoken and thoughtful about the game by the standards of English footballers.
Of his age, because I'll be honest, kids that I love, I mean, Phil Foden, Cole Palmer, same kind of age, you can pay me to listen to a post-match interview. Bless them with those two guys.
He's not well-spoken and thoughtful about football in comparison to continental footballers of his age. So Mbappe is leagues ahead in thinking and speaking about football, but also Frenkie de Jong. So, you know, the journalists will ask Frenkie, so why did we lose? Or why was midfield not working? And Frenkie says, okay. And then he gives a 7-minute answer explaining.
Yeah, but why? Maybe Frankie and Kylian are just also exemplars for their generation rather than the standard.
Yeah, they're more advanced. But I'm saying let's not put Jude Bellingham down as this kind of Mahatma Gandhi figure.
No, I am comparing him to English footballers of his age.
You're comparing him to Cole Palmer, and yes, there would be a distinct difference there, yeah.
And just to mention, in that first season at Real Madrid, one of the things that he does become very vocal about is the abhorrent racism that Vini Jr., one of his teammates, has been consistently barraged with in La Liga by opposition fans. This is something that's brought Vini to tears. It's been terribly handled by the Spanish FA. There seems to be no reprimand for the club or the fans every time this happens.
It's disgusting, yes. Yeah.
And Bellingham does intervene. And as a young player in his first season in Real Madrid, it would have been fine for him to say nothing, but he chooses to speak out. And I think that is commendable, because I don't know how it works in Spain, Simon, you will know better, but I feel like if Jude Bellingham talks about it, it might get a bit more prominence than, say, if another Spanish footballer does.
Because, I mean, at Valencia, this terrible abuse of Vini was treated as a kind of joke and part of club culture, and Vini was provoking it because he's arrogant. It's just amazing the stuff that people say. And I think it's good to have a kind of trusted voice with an outside perspective saying, no, this is not okay. This is disgusting. This is a blot on your football. You should do something about it. I mean, Bellingham says the sad thing is that you now come to expect racism and you prepare for it when you play in Spanish football. And he said that's the saddest thing of all. It's not really a surprise when it happens. It's just all part of how things work. Now, where does he go as a player? Because I read this really interesting Philipp Lahm column. You remember Lahm was the German captain when they won the World Cup in 2014. Again, a hugely intelligent player, the kind of player that the manager would give him a piece of tactical advice and Lahm would absorb it in 2 seconds and implement it. And Lahm says the thing that Bellingham needs to do is he needs to choose his identity as a footballer. Who is he on the field? Not just someone who can play every position, but decide this is who I really am. This is who I most am, whether it's playmaker or number 6, and then make himself the best in that position. I mean, do you think that that's what he needs to do to choose a speciality, as it were?
No, and I think that might be a reflection of some of Lahm's limitations, because famously he was a fullback that Pep Guardiola tried to play in midfield that it did not work out for him. And I think Lahm suffered a little bit from that. I think Jude Bellingham doesn't need to have a fixed identity. And that's partially because I think football is also changing. So I think versatility used to be something that was basically something that you said about players when you weren't able to describe what they could do well. But I think people like Jude and his teammates, so in particular, I'm thinking about Camavinga and Tchouaméni, who can play in midfield and defence, not so much up the pitch, show that there is a model for a new type of footballer that can do a lot of things really, really well. We've also spoken about the fact that he really wants to affect the game. So I think that if there is going to be somewhere that he's going to be feeling more at home, it's more up the pitch than maybe falling back into the classic 4-6 central midfield, defensive midfielder role. I think he wants to affect the game and he's been doing that really well. So if there is something that he needs to, define, I think it's going to be the fact that he's more further up the pitch than...
Yeah, because attacking, creating goals is harder. It's the hardest thing in football. And so you'd want your best player to be focused on that.
There's comparisons with Zidane, Simon. What do you think?
Zidane was not a great athlete. Zidane was a great footballer. And Zidane was slow, was a bit too heavy, wasn't a brilliant defender. Zidane was the best controller of a football that I've ever seen, I think. I mean, with Messi.
But Jude doesn't have that. I don't think he has that technical ability.
I don't think Jude is the best at any one thing in football. He is the most all-round of the great players, but, he doesn't have a dribble like Messi. He doesn't have a touch of Zidane. He probably isn't the defensive force of Vieira is, but he's very close to all those guys. One other thing that really struck me watching the goals is he has a perfect heading technique. He heads as well as a traditional English centre forward. He jumps, he snaps his head at exactly the right moment. It hits him in the centre of the forehead. It goes really hard. He aims his headers. So this is a guy who you show him anything in football and he can do it. And so, maybe you want to position that figure at number 10 with the highest chance of, as you say, making the difference to the result. But you keep all those characteristics of the game. I mean, if you compare him to some other great players of our time, like his teammates Toni Kroos or Luka Modric, or you compare him to his future teammate Mbappe and Vini, these guys are brilliant specialists. Like, you couldn't play Modric in 4 positions or Mbappe. They're very, very good at what they do, but Bellingham's range is broader than anyone.
We're talking about this incredibly prodigious kid, but by the standards of what is becoming football today, Jude Bellingham is an old man. And I say this because I think we are living in the star boy era of footballers. So to mention a few, Lamine Yamal, who's had an incredible season with Barcelona and is likely to have a brilliant Euros tournament with Spain, is 16 years old. Endrick, who's probably already the most exciting player in that Brazil squad, is 17. Arda Güler, who is the teammate of Bellingham, who was signed from the Turkish league in the same season, is making his, he's played a couple of games towards the end of the season. He's 19. Musiala, Florian Wirtz, they're 21. We've already mentioned Palmer is 22. Bukayo Saka, who feels like he's been playing football for years, is only 22 years old. So we are seeing incredibly complete footballers who are getting younger and younger and younger, Simon.
And I think this is about academies becoming more professional. At the top level, you start to live like a professional and train like a professional from about the age of 11, 12. So you're getting very high level training. Your nutrition is very good. You're not going to McDonald's and you're getting psychological accompaniment that great players of the past never did. And so when these guys break into football at 16, break into the first team, they're already complete in a way that previous generations weren't. I mean, you could also mention Camavinga in that sense. He emerged in French football at 16, and there wasn't really much to fix. And I think there's a meme where he also plays goalkeeper because, like Bellingham, you play every position. So you're getting the best trained, most professional living generation of footballers that we've ever seen coming into football and looking complete in a way that Messi and Ronaldo were not.
And if you think about the longevity in the game, which is something that Ronaldo, Messi have pioneered, I'm just thinking about Thiago Silva. I watched his last game at Chelsea a couple of days ago. He's 39 years old. Are we entering an era where footballers can play high-level professional football for 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's not clear. I looked at some of the stats on that.
I guess we don't know, right? We don't know whether these young kids are going to be able to sustain the pressures of the game as far as Ronaldo's and Messi's did.
Yeah, so there's two scenarios for Bellingham. One is that you live like a hyper-professional for 15 years or even the 20 years that Messi and Ronaldo have put in. And year in, year out, you perform like that. And that's the kind of dream scenario, in which case England will actually win something, maybe even starting with the Euro this summer.
God, maybe even 2 World Cups.
Yeah, I mean, Bellingham is part of a better English generation than I've seen before. He's part of a better generation than Messi has played with most of his time with Argentina or Ronaldo with Portugal. So that the sky's the limit. But the warning, the kind of potential downside is in 2016, I interviewed the young Paul Pogba. And Pogba was, I think, the most complete European footballer of his generation. He could do everything. And he said to me, I want to be the complete midfielder. I said, what do you mean? And he said, I want to do everything. Defend, attack, score, give assists, tackle, win back the ball, be a leader on the field. And that was Pogba sketching it out. And I thought, this is a bit of a joke. And he says, yeah, this is what I want to be. I want to be Ronaldo and Ronaldinho and Messi and everyone and Iniesta. And Pogba, like Bellingham, maybe even more than Bellingham, Pogba had the gifts to do that. He was built like Vieira and he had the touch of Cristiano Ronaldo. And he does win the World Cup. He's the key player in the French team, I think, in 2018. And he's 25 and he never does anything after. His career implodes and currently he's banned for drugs. He just couldn't kind of mentally sustain being at the top. So that's how the career can also go. I think Bellingham is in a much more stable situation in terms of family support than Pogba ever was.
I mean, let's be honest. I mean, so I think that the thing that you mentioned is really important. Where does it go wrong for Pogba? We could go on, this is a whole episode.
We'll do the podcast, yeah.
We are going to do the podcast. But I guess Manchester United is one of the reasons why, which is also why I think that Bellingham is likely to stay at Madrid for a really long time, because he has the environment that will be conducive to success over and over and over and over again. So maybe that's the variable that makes him not Paul Pogba and not having a crazy brother.
Yeah, I think he chose Dortmund very well. And I think he chose Madrid well, partly because Ancelotti was there. And so it's a sensible coach and a sensibly run club at the moment. So I think having parents who help you make those big decisions, which is also the case with Mbappe. I keep coming back to the Mbappe parallel because I think the career of Mbappe is closest to Bellingham's. That is an asset that somebody like Pogba could only dream of. And Cristiano also didn't have that support. Cristiano made an amazing career for himself, but he kind of had to make it without family help. In fact, he was carrying a partially broken family. And Bellingham and Mbappe have the luxury that they have incredibly together families to support them on this very complex journey.
And you think Bellingham and Mbappe will be a perfect marriage in Madrid next season?
I mean, Mbappe has very strong views on how to play football. He sees himself as a kind of coach. But Mbappe says, look, I can play in every position up front. I can play centre forward, but I can also come in from the wing. He said, I can play in all 3 forward positions. And so he doesn't insist on being the finisher in the box. And so I could see a forward trio of Mbappe, Vinicius Jr., and Bellingham just behind. That would be terrifying.
It's pretty frightening.
What about England, though?
I mean, you've already pointed out, but I think it's becoming very annoying that England are an insanely likeable team, which means me sustaining my ancient hostility towards the English football team is becoming much more difficult to maintain.
Yeah, even I quite like England now, I have to admit.
Yes, but yeah, you love Southgate too, so...
Yeah, I love Southgate.
That helps.
An episode very soon, people.
He's like your little centrist dad twin. Yeah, we'll do that episode in a couple of weeks. What do we think England will do? I'm going to say, let's just stick to history. England are going to bottle it. They'll get close. They won't get there. That's what I'm saying.
Only fools try and predict individual tournaments. I'm going to say that Bellingham has, let's say, 12 years, all being normal, of being in this England team. So that's another 3 World Cups, 2034?
Yeah, and he'll be captain in the next one. Absolutely, no doubt.
So for the anyone but England crowd,
It's tough.
it's going to be hard years.
It's tough, my people. Get in touch if you need a support group. I'm the CEO of the Anyone But England organisation. Okay, so we end this podcast. We often ask, would we like to hang out with our figure? Simon?
Well, I was slightly chastened to see that I'm older than his dad by about 7 years. So I think it would be sort of inappropriate. Yeah.
It would be weird. Somebody would call the police. I think you'd be fine. I think you'd feel the generation gap. I don't think you'd feel it so acutely because of the things that we mentioned, because you can talk about Pulp Fiction or the Beatles.
Yeah, we could talk about Pulp Fiction at some length. Yeah.
There you go. And what would Jude have been if he was not a footballer?
I'm going to say he'd be one of those people who work in a hospital who kind of deal with the families and go around the wards cheering up the kids. What do you call that? A kind of...
A counsellor?
Yeah, a kind of cheery counsellor, a support worker in a hospital.
I think you have done him a massive disservice with that one.
I think it's a very difficult, obviously I could not have been that person.
You can't do it, obviously, because you're severely limited in your emotional intelligence. But I think, and I've heard you talking about other types of sports, he likes basketball and he also likes the NFL.
Yeah, he said he would have been a quarterback, but I was trying to rule out athletic professions.
No, okay, so I'm going to rule back in athletic professions because I love American football.
Yeah, I do too, yeah. I see him more as a wide receiver, actually, although he could probably play in any position.
So here's the thing. So quarterbacks right now, if you think of Patrick Mahomes, he's a former baseball player who can basically sling the ball in a way that no quarterback has ever done. I think that Bellingham could have played any sport. We already mentioned that he, perfected cricket when he was a young kid. He would be that dual threat quarterback that can run, that can throw the ball, that can sling the ball, that can catch the ball, that can go through people. I think he'd be in the vein of the modern, incredible all-rounder quarterback. So I'm gonna put him up as the next Patrick Mahomes. Even better, maybe.
Would you like to hang out with him?
Oh, it's going to sound terrible. Not particularly. Maybe even I would feel the age gap a bit too much. I think he's a super laudable kind of guy. But maybe the problem is if I was around him, I'd turn on my Brummie accent and it would be a mess. Yeah,
no, don't do that. Yeah, so the nightmare scenario is that at some point in the next 10 years, Jude Bellingham is holding the World Cup aloft in an England shirt. How would you cope?
I would flee the country, obviously. I've made preparations for this. There's a whole plan for what happens if England never win the league. You ain't never going to see this face again.
Thank you for listening to Heroes and Humans of Football. For more information, go to our website at heroesandhumans.com.
And follow us at Heroes and Humans on all social platforms. This show was developed by Immaterial and produced by One Fine Play. Matt Cheney is the series producer. Kazra Firuzia is the editor and producer. We have been your hosts, Mehreen Khan
and Simon Cooper.
And this has been Heroes and Humans of Football.